And there's a story about Father Price. There was a public hanging, the last public hanging in North Carolina. It happened around the year 1910. Afro-American. All right. He was convicted of stealing something. So he was sentenced to death. Father Price used to go to the penitentiary right near in North, and he would meet people. He'd go to different places. And he heard about this man. He went to see his lawyer. He went to see the judge to try to delay or even try to change. First of all, try to change the verdict. That didn't work. Then try to delay his execution because it was the last public hanging. He was going to be hanged by rope. So one day, the day he was supposed to, this Harvey, Stevie was his name was going to be hanged. There was a big crowd, and they were waiting for the hanging. Well, the crowd found out the judge delayed it. And the reason was because Father Price had asked him to. So they were not very happy. So Father Price said, well, everybody, come to the courtyard, courthouse. There's going to be a speech. Everybody went into the courthouse, and he gave them a speech about the Catholic faith. And then about a week later, he got permission to stay with Henry Harvey, in his jail cell. He had baptized him, and he stayed up all night praying for the man. And then in the morning, he said Mass for him, gave him Holy Communion, and then he knew for sure the man went to God. So it was a story of a great compassion for people.
Go ahead, Joe. You can introduce the podcast.
Okay. Hi, welcome to our podcast. I'm Maryknoll Father Joe Veneroso.
Hi, I'm Luna, and I work for the Church Engagement Division.
And we're here today with Father Jim Najmowski. Father Jim, welcome to our show.
Thank you for welcoming me on your show. My name is Father Jim Najmowski. I'm a Maryknoll missionary. I've been in South Korea for 28 years, and then I was 15 years in Northeast China, commonly known as Manchuria. And now I've come back last November to work on the canonization causes of our founders, James, Anthony, and
that's excellent. And that's what we wanted to ask you about today. So just briefly, for the sake of our listeners, introduce our founders, because many of them might not even know who our founders were.
Sure. Our founders are two American priests, both belonging to separate dioceses. Father Thomas Fredrick Price belonged to the Diocese of Raleigh, and at that time, Raleigh, North Carolina, had only one, well, it wasn't even a diocese, it was a vicariate, something before a diocese. And he was the first native-born priest to be ordained for the Diocese of North Carolina. And briefly, James Anthony Walsh was from the city of Boston, born in Cambridge, and he was a priest, the fourth assistant priest at St. Patrick's in Roxbury, Roxbury, Massachusetts, which is still going on. And then after he was ordained in 1892, up until 1903, he was an assistant priest, and then he was asked to take over the Boston Archdiocese Propagation of Faith. And from there, his interest in mission, which had already started in the seminary, developed strongly. And in 1907, with some priests in the Archdiocese of Boston, they started what they call the Field Afar magazine. And the Field Afar magazine was a very romantic way of talking about the overseas mission. And at that time, there were no American priests or sisters, maybe a handful, because they had to go to either Canada or Europe to enter a congregation. So the idea was to make America was very rich, becoming rich. It's a big problem. So make Americans aware of the need to support missioners overseas. But the second purpose was eventually to prepare for an American Americans going overseas. They didn't think they would be able to do their own American, say, seminary. They thought they might bring over the Foreign Missions Seminary of Society of Paris or the Mill Hill Fathers. And they were going to come to New York, but it didn't work out, or we say it didn't pan out. And Father Price, he was about 6 years older than James Anthony Walsh. And his mother was a convert. North Carolina at that time was practically non-Catholic at that time. But his mother was a convert from Methodism because of two people. Thomas Fredrick Gallagher was a doctor, a medical doctor from Ireland, and his wife. And when she was going to school, she boarded with them. And through their influence, she became interested in the faith and became a Catholic. And then after she was baptized, she was asked to leave her home. So since she stayed with them and then met Father Price's father, who was a newspaper publisher, Alfred Lanier Price. He was a newspaper publisher, and he had his own newspaper in Wilmington. And they got married, and they had 10 children. And
Wow.
yeah, they had 10 children, 5 girls and 5 boys. And the 2 oldest daughters became religious. One was Sister Catherine, the Order of the Our Lady of Mercy community, which was started in South Carolina, Charleston, by I think the first bishop there. I didn't write his name down. And Father Price was given after his ordination. He was given the parish of Newton. It's still there. I went to see it once with one of our Maryknoll priests, Father. I think your classmate, Father Clyde Phillips. We went to see it one time, and then from there he was doing a lot of missionary work for the Catholics. But then he heard about the Paulist Fathers, Father Elliot, Elliot. He was a northerner. He had been in the army, the Yankee Army, the Northern Army, and he had been doing conversions or work or preaching for non-Catholics up the north. So Father Price wanted to get in contact with him, and he did. But Father Elliot told him to do his own work.
Wow.
Well, he thought about it, and he went to see, at that time, Cardinal Gibbons. I have to backtrack a little bit. Cardinal Gibbons was the first vicariate, the bishop, wasn't a diocese yet, but a vicariate of North Carolina. And he lived very close to the home where Father Price was. And Father Price was only a little boy, and he was an altar boy, so he knew him very well. He knew Cardinal Gibbons, and sometimes when Cardinal Gibbons would go to a church and he was free, he would take Father Price with him as a little boy. So he knew him very well. So he went and contacted Cardinal Gibbons, and Cardinal Gibbons told him, yes, by all means, try to do something. So he went back, and then he had to go see his now another bishop. The new bishop was an Benedictine. He was the abbot, Bishop Haid, Haid, of Belmont Abbey, because they couldn't find any. They didn't have any priests there, so he became the bishop. And for some reason, he gave him permission, even though that meant taking him out of parish work, not being able to do things as far as parish work. and he started to do. He started first of all to preach to Catholics. Then he noticed he had a problem. He needed also to do some type of publishing. So he started a magazine called Truth, Truth, explaining the doctrines of the Catholic faith and the difference between, say, Catholics and non-Catholics. Then he discovered another problem. When he be coming back to where he had his location there, he realized there were a lot of orphans, really poor people, some with parents, some without parents. So he got permission, and somehow he collected money and was able to build an orphanage. And he started another magazine called The Orphan Boy. And then as he was doing this, he said, well, I can't do this alone. The state of North Carolina is so big. He got permission to start what they call Regina Apostolorum, Queen of the Apostles. And he wanted to have a seminary and to train priests to work for the apostolate of North Carolina. And he started, and there were problems, money, not enough vocations coming down. Mm-hmm. And so there were a few, I don't remember exactly how many, maybe less than 10 got ordained for it, for his Regina Apostolorum work. But he also had seminarians from the north, and some became bishops, coming down during the summertime and going out with the priests. And what they would do is go out to these, he would call them outstations, but they were very, very poor shacks, set up, get everything ready. Then they would go and they'll have their mass and go around, tell people there would be a preaching at nighttime, because in those days they didn't have night masses. They would have preaching, and he called the non-Catholics, and they would be preaching to them just like a regular preacher. So that's what he was doing. But at the same time, Father Price was very interested in the foreign missions. And it was in 1903 for sure that I remember. I'll be looking at my notes here. Father Price, there was a conference, a Washington conference on the missions. And James Anthony had attended it, and he also had attended it. So they got to know one another, but just from their great interest in the missions. To make a long story short, in 1910, both of them attended the first International Eucharistic Congress held in Montreal, Canada. Mm-hmm. And they were at this Eucharistic Congress, and Father Price heard that Father Walsh was there. He goes, "Ooh, he's just the man I want to see." He gave him a phone call. They met, and from there, they just got so absorbed in what they were doing that people around them, bishops and other people, were trying to say hello to them. They just didn't hear them. And from then on, Father Price really took the ball in the sense that he had known many of the bishops in the United States because they were his classmates, either in St. Charles Seminary, which is a college seminary, and then St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore. So he knew many of them. And Cardinal O'Connor of Boston was one of his classmates only at St. Charles. So he got the ball rolling. And again, what did he do? He went to see Cardinal Gibbons, because he always went to see Cardinal Gibbons. And Cardinal Gibbons said, well, you should go see the Apostolic Nuncio, who was named Falconio. And Falconio says, well, write up a plan, and then the archbishops will be meeting in spring of April 1911. And sure enough, they got a plan. He went to see the bishops. They got a plan together. Both of them agreed. And in the April meeting, the bishops approved the plan, and they said, well, we approved the plan, but we want you to go to Rome to see Propaganda Fide and see if they approve it. And so on May the 30th, they boarded a boat, and they went to Europe. They went to England first to see the Mill Hill Fathers, to learn how what they do for seminary training. They went to France, Foreign Mission Society. They went to Italy, the Milan Society, and they finally got to Rome. The long and the short of it, they're only in Rome beginning of maybe the second or third week of June. Not too much time, but one of the undersecretaries of the Propaganda Fide and many of the cardinals in Rome, plus the Pope himself, are very interested in having Americans go to the missions, because America didn't really have any mission society as such. And because of the influence of American, I guess, economic power, and also because there are many Protestants missionaries overseas, the Chinese, the Koreans, other countries thought all Christians were Protestant, not Catholic, so they wanted America to go. So very, very helpful. So within 3 weeks, actually, within less than 3 weeks, on June the 29th, they were called into that Propaganda Fide, and they're given permission to start the society. And the next day, they were given a special audience with Pius X. And so that's more or less how it began. Now, if you have any questions, then we can go on from there. So I can look at some.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting for some background of Father Price. Now, of course, you're investigating both of our founders, but let's concentrate on Father Price for this podcast.
Okay.
Tell us about his spirituality.
His spirituality, his spirituality, very Catholic spirituality. I did my thesis on him too. I have it right here.
Wow. Yeah.
I read it again, and I said, "Boy, I did pretty good." I said, "How did I ever do that so many years ago?" He had a great devotion to the Blessed Mother. Why? Mm-hmm. Well, his mother did. His mother, her name was Clarissa Bond Price. His mother had a great devotion to the Blessed Mother, and in those days, all over the Catholic world, there was a great devotion to the Blessed Mother. We have, in 1858, we have the apparitions at Lourdes. We have the popes writing many encyclicals about the Blessed Mother. But he had a great devotion to the Blessed Mother. And when he was 16 years old, he was going from Wilmington up to St. Charles in Maryland. And in those days, overland travel was not very convenient, so they were taking a ship called the Rebecca Clyde. It was a sailboat. And from where the parish is, now you walk down probably less than 10 minutes. You can see beautiful wharf. The old part of Wilmington is still there. He took that boat, but they met it was in September, and they met they had a hurricane gale. The ship was broken up. They didn't have enough life vests apparently on the boat, so he didn't have one, and a few other people didn't have one, and he was washed overboard, and he was down underwater, and he called out to Jesus. He said, "Jesus, save me, save me." And then he had an apparition of the Blessed Mother pointing to a plank, one of these floating planks, and he clung onto the plank, but there was a hook on it, I guess, one of these hooks on it. And he said from that moment on, he said, he just felt a great joy in his life. So he had a special apparition, for sure. He saw the Blessed Mother, and it's recorded. Cardinal William O'Connor, in his biography called Recollection of 70 Years, talks about it. I have here, if you want to listen to it. It's a little bit long recollection. And then just before his diaconate, he got a bad, I guess, fever or cold. In those days, they probably didn't have the medicines, and it affected his hearing. So he was going deaf. So he made a novena to the Blessed Mother, and after the end of the novena, his hearing completely cleared up. So that was one of the, those two aspects would be part of his devotion. The other thing too, his mother, before he became a subdeacon, I got the night. He went to, like, he hadn't got home to see his mother since his family, because the travel in those days was difficult over roads. But he had gone home maybe before subdiaconate, saw his mother, and then his mother died. And when his mother died, just before his mother died, the pastor, his name is Father Mark Gross. His eyesight was going. So as he gave her the oils and he gave her the final blessing, he asked her, when you get to heaven, please pray for me so I can read Mass. Well, she died. The next day, he was able to read Mass. His eyesight was completely restored. And then a few weeks later, when the family was at Mass, one of the nephews, one of Clarissa Bond's grandsons, Father Price's nephew, was at Mass, and he starts to scream out. He says, I see Grandma. She's beautiful, with two people beside her, a man and a woman. And so they knew that she was in heaven. And of course, Father Price then knew it was through the intercession of Blessed Mother, a great Clarissa Bond's great devotion to Blessed Mother. But Father Price's spirituality really is Christocentric, which means centered on Jesus. He always wanted to be united with Jesus no matter what he did. So those were the main things. And then later on, in 1911, when they had gone to Father James, at that time, Father James Anthony Walsh, later on Bishop James Anthony Walsh, when they went to Europe, on the way back, he wanted to stop in Lourdes, Father Price. Why? The Blessed Mother. You heard about Lourdes, he went to see it. And when he went there, apparently he had a very special experience. Bernadette. At that time, Bernadette was not a saint. Now she's Saint Bernadette. He had a deep experience. And he started to change his spirituality in the sense that a very deep devotion to Bernadette, and he always had a devotion to the saints, but a very deep devotion to Bernadette, and a deeper devotion to the Blessed Mother, the Eucharist, humility. He wanted to lose himself more and more and lose his identity. Now, people think that's strange because he really had a great devotion to Saint Bernadette, and there's lots of writing about it. Why did he do that? Well, I was asked to write something about it because he's like a young kid, or anybody. And I remember I was growing up, I used to like Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, the Yankee stars. And you would want to buy have the baseball cards. We have these baseball cards, gum, get baseball card, trade baseball cards, the hats, what they did, what they wear. Or even some people like, who is this? Elvis Presley, even old people like Elvis Presley want to imitate Elvis Presley. Or young people like to imitate Michael Jordan. Well, he wanted to imitate Bernadette. The reason is because Bernadette was nothing in a certain sense. Bernadette said, well, if the Blessed Mother had found somebody else even less worthy or less important, she would have used her instead of me, or use that person instead of me. And Father Price wanted to lose himself in Jesus, not to have his own, say, personality being puffed up, pride. And now that was very important. Why? He's a Southerner. And he was an educated Southerner. The Southern person, position, his father, a publisher. They weren't really poor. They had money. They weren't rich, but they weren't poor. They had prestige. They were educated. He had a lot of prestige. For Southerners, of course, your pride. What school did you go to? Your family background, etc., etc. So for him, he wanted to lose that pride in many different ways. Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
I don't want to
I want to comment on Father Price's, devotion to the Blessed Mother. And I find this conversation very relevant, especially because it was her birthday yesterday.
Yes.
And just how I wonder was he, and I don't know if there's any research on this, but did he feel like he identified with the Blessed Mother because of being a refugee, having to fled from home and, wanting to be so devoted to Jesus and so devoted to Christ? So I just wonder if he identified with the Blessed Mother and why he was so devoted to her.
He was identified with her. I'm thinking about your question. He was identified with her as far as being a son.
Mm-hmm.
A son.
Mm-hmm.
Because Jesus was the Son of God and also the Son of Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to identify himself, obviously, with Jesus. But he knew that Mary formed his human nature. He was quite well aware of that. And that Mary taught him.
Mm-hmm.
So he wanted to learn from her. And he thinks that Saint Bernadette, was formed by Mary. Obviously, she was. It was an extraordinary experience that happened in Lourdes. She was formed by Mary and to be humble and to pray for the conversion of sinners. And that was the other big thing, too, because he wanted to pray for the conversion of sinners, conversion of North Carolina, because his mom and later on his father, before he died, too, who had been an Episcopalian, he became a convert to the Catholic faith. And he realized the depth of communion with Jesus and how Mary more or less makes that. It's like having a nice little flower, say, but then Mary would be the beautiful flower pot, if you wish.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a good analogy there, but somehow having Mary there would make what you had even look better. And so that was one of his, I think, things he would always be thinking about. As far as a refugee, I didn't think about it that way. Certainly, he felt it was very difficult. I have it recorded here. It's a little bit of a long story. There was a time he was preaching, and obviously he was preaching to a hostile audience. They used to call him Mr. Priest, not Father. Mr. Priest is because he's a Mr. Priest. And some of the people weren't very nice. They would be throwing cabbages, carrots, potatoes. And I'm sure it bothered him for a while, but he stopped for a second and he looks at everybody. He goes, well, if someone would throw me some meat, then I can make a nice stew. And everybody started to laugh, and the hostility of the crowd seemed to abate, go down. So he was very happy about that. He had a good sense of humor, but it was difficult in those times too. And there's a story about Father Price. There was a public hanging. I have it. I mean, I know I have it. The last public hanging in North Carolina. Here it is. It happened around the year 1910. Afro-American. All right. He was convicted of stealing something. So he was sentenced to death, whatever he did. Father Price used to go to the penitentiary right near in North, and he would meet people. He'd go to different places, and he heard about this man. So he went to see his lawyer. He went to see the judge to try to delay, or even try to change. First of all, try to change the verdict. That didn't work. Then try to delay his execution because it was the last public hanging. He was going to be hanged by rope, so people could see it. He tried to delay. It didn't work. But so one day, the day he was supposed to, this Stevie was his name was going to be hanged. There was a big crowd, and they were waiting for the hanging. Well, the crowd found out the judge delayed it, and the reason was because Father Price had asked him to. So they were not very happy. So Father Price said, "Well, everybody, come to the courtyard, courthouse. There's going to be a speech." Everybody went into the courthouse, and he gave them a speech about the Catholic faith. And then about a week later, he got permission to stay with Harvey Henry Harvey, in his jail cell. He had baptized him, and he stayed up all night praying for the man. And in the morning, he said Mass for him, gave him Holy Communion, and then he knew for sure the man went to God. So it was a story of a great compassion for people. And also, if he could, there were not many Afro-American Catholic priests, but if Father Price he knew a few Afro-American priests, he would go to them for confession. Had a great respect for them, had a great love for them too.
Yeah, that story also tells me a lot of solidarity. Just, being with people and accompanying them to their very end of life. I think that's really what represents what true compassion and love and solidarity is. So yeah, that's a beautiful story.
Well, there was another little story that I happened to find. I didn't know that one before. An Afro-American woman, because he had preached to he was working for them, but then they burnt, at that time, lots of prejudice down south. So the little house or the little shack or the little place they were having the meeting, he would teach the Afro-American children and other Afro-Americans late at night when they came back from work, and they came and listened to him. But the place was burnt down. So he stopped that to a certain extent because he did not want them to be hurt or killed. So he wouldn't do that. He stopped that. But there was I was happened to read it the other day in New Jersey. Glen Ridge, New Jersey, but it's called Montclair, New Jersey, with an Italian community, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and was an Afro-American. She came from South because there was an Afro-American community up there too now, and she was, I guess, begging at the door and talking to someone. She said, "Yeah, I know his Father Price. He went over to China to baptize those people. He baptized me." He says, "I remember Father Price. He baptized me. Good man," he said. So something like that. People, after all those years, that was in 1957. So that was way after he died in 1919. So people remembered him. Those things, remember good things about him, and said, "Yes, I was baptized by him." So little stories you find out. Is there anything else?
Father Jim, I have a question. Now, yeah. I only have this question because these are two stories that are very familiar with most Maryknollers, and they're a little bit offbeat.
All right.
But they're one of those things that you tend to remember, and it's unique. The two things is, if you could tell our listeners about the spiritual marriage between Father Price and Saint Bernadette, and then what became of Father Price's heart.
All right. Why don't you give me I have it right here, all my things. Yes, he felt he had he felt he was called to model himself on Bernadette. He had a close relationship to Bernadette in Saint Bernadette of Lourdes, Saint Bernadette Soubirous, and he felt that the Blessed Mother had introduced Saint Bernadette to him. So, when he went back, he went back a few times. In fact, one of the rosaries he was saying was Saint Bernadette's rosary. The brother had given it to him. The cloak that he wore at the end, a worn-out cloak, was one of the cloaks that Saint Bernadette's brother had given to him. And he also used to help the family. The family was very poor. He also helped the family materially in many ways. So he had a great liking for them. But you see, the spiritual part of it there is because he felt that the Blessed Mother was calling him to lose his own identity. In a sense, we say we want to have a Christ-like identity. We want to be identified with Christ. We want to become more like Christ. And that was Father Price's goal, very Christian. But he felt that Bernadette was Christ-like, completely, forgetting herself. She was never allowed to talk about her experiences after she entered the convent, and she didn't want to in many ways either. And when people would come in France, rich people want to come see what does Saint Bernadette look like, she would try to hide herself, always trying to hide herself, not to have any publicity. He liked that because he didn't want to have any publicity about himself or who he was. He wanted to hide himself like Christ. The Philippians 2:6-11. Christ empties himself on the cross. He became a man to empty himself right up until death. And so Saint Bernadette was his his concrete way, if you wish, for him at that time. A very concrete way of how to become more Christ-like. And if you're Christ-like, then you're with the Blessed Mother, because the mother was the mother of Jesus. And Mary teaches us how to become Christ-like. The church asks us to follow the example of Blessed Mother, because the Blessed Mother helps us. So we go, Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. So we have that identity, and he did. He felt that very strongly there. He felt that strong, and then through that experience, I have can't have to find out where I put it, but I know through that experience, then he has, as we all should, and we all do, but we don't always experience that way, an experience of the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Now, Christian theology. When we are baptized, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit come to us. And that's, again, strengthened in our confirmation. When we receive any sacraments, Father, Son, the Holy Spirit come to us. Today, this morning, you go to Mass. Through the humanity of Jesus Christ, we are united not only with Jesus in his manhood, his sacred humanity, but also through Jesus, because of his divinity, we are united with Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. It's in John's Gospel, John 16. I was going to say 23, but I think I'm wrong there. So that indwelling. But now, through his, imitation, love of Bernadette's virtues, who Bernadette was, humble, self-effacing, completely dedicated, obedient, not wanting to put oneself forward, always praying, always giving, offering things for the conversion of sinners, because that was his goal, to bring those outside, you can say, outside of not knowing Christ, whoever they be, Catholic or non-Catholic, into this relationship with God, so that their identity would be able to enjoy the experience of God. And as he grew, he'd experience in many ways this indwelling joy of the Trinity. And he has some experiences, and they're documented. But he also attributes this to, because of his own humility, that it was through the intercession of the Blessed Mother and also of Saint Bernadette. Now, you mentioned something else, Father Joe, but I can't remember. Huh?
You're muted. You're muted, Joe.
There we go. The wedding ring, first of all, because I think that's in our museum. That's very
Yes, it's your museum.
And then the other part was what became of Father Thomas Price's heart.
Oh, yes, his heart. That's not okay. Well, the wedding ring was just a symbol of his marriage, external symbol. Priests, when we get ordained, well, we go out in ministry, we wear our clericals as a symbol, a symbol of something different, so people can recognize us, realize that we're there for these purposes. When we put on vestments at Mass and say Mass, is a symbol. So it was for him was very symbolic, a reminder. The Jews used to put, they have tassels on their clothes and things like that. So for him was very symbolic in that sense. Now, his heart, he wanted to be buried in Lourdes or Nevers. Okay, Saint Bernadette joined the Sisters of Nevers, and they were teaching order and doing. And she was not able to teach. All she did was mend vestments and pray because she was sick. She had sickness. He wanted to be buried next to her, but he didn't get permission. So he talked Mother General. Please, how about my heart?
Wow.
That's the reason. The other body would have been there, but the reason the heart was there because he wanted to be buried next to her, right next to her, but that permission was not granted. So then he asked that at least his heart be transferred over there. And if you go today in the with the Sisters in Nevers, there's a glass sarcophagus or casket of Saint Bernadette, and she's preserved. There's no chemicals, and her body is soft. But you look at here, and on the right side, right there is there's in the wall, the niche of the wall, his heart. There's an urn, and there's a plaque in English there. That's where his heart is. Remember now he's very romantic. Why? Southern gentleman, gentleman. They're very chivalrous. So Southern gentlemen, they're very chivalrous. They want to go for their lady. As say in the Middle Ages, a knight would pledge his knighthood to a lady and do chivalrous deeds for a lady. He would give everything to this lady, and all his honor would go to this lady that he loved. And so Father Price wanted to give his love through Bernadette, obviously, to God, the blessed one, to God. So that was one of the reasons he did it. It's symbolic.
Also, Father Jim, now I understand that both Father Price and Bishop Walsh have been declared servants of God. That's one step. And where is the process now? What miracles are being investigated to help to move them along in the canonization process?
Okay, well, you have to backtrack a little bit. First of all, a servant of God, if the person has virtues, the bishop will declare the person a servant of God. Then there has to be an investigation process. Father Price's investigation, it's a long process. I'm doing it now. I did it along all these things. It's for all these index of all these things we have to get ready. Witnesses, documents, books they wrote, many, many different things that have to be done. The bishop's permission. Father Price's cause is already in Rome. At one time, all the processes started in Rome. Now, with the new norms, everything has to, even if you're saying we're a society of apostolic life. Now, if you're a religious society, still the process, the beginning of how to do this must start in the diocese. So the Diocese of Raleigh, North Carolina, very much interested. And in 2018, all the documentation that we have had collected. Maryknoll did a lot. The Diocese of Raleigh did a lot. And the bishop gave permission. It's all been sent to Rome. So that's 2018. And at the congregation for the canonization of the saints, Father Price is causes there. And if that, then it's another. Now, not only do the priests and people that work, and some laity that work, they have to read it. But also at the end, one cardinal has to read it. So it goes up to a process. And finally, because the cardinals then will recommend to the Pope that the person should be declared venerable. So after that, then the person is declared venerable. So actually, right now, we're waiting for Father Price, hopefully, that he will be declared venerable. And then you can have more or less kind of open up a little bit wider. Father James Anthony's cause is a little bit delayed because it's going through the because he's here in New York, the Archdiocese of New York, and Maryknoll is doing a lot of the work. And lately, I'm doing a lot of the work, and we're not yet finished with all the collection of the data, but we've done a lot. We've got a lot of things, and I think Father Joe, you were one of the witnesses, I think, anyway, we have a lot of the documentation, but we still lacking more, and things have to be typed and things. Because of the COVID-19, we don't have a secretary, so I'm doing everything. I'm learning how to do Word, and I have a lot of little problems that way.
Good skills.
Now, we talk about a miracle of Father Price. Well, there's a lot of. I'm glad you mentioned that. I have a few things. First of all, after he died, this is by Father Bernie Meyer. Father Bernie Meyer was one of the first 4 Maryknolls. Father Price, James Edward Walsh, who became a bishop, and Father Francis Ford, who became a bishop and is also a servant of God, and Father Bernie Meyer were the first Maryknolls in September the 7th. 2 days ago, they departed from Maryknoll here, right now in where our parking lot is, where the house was. But he testifies this. He's in December 1920. He writes it in the mission letters. He says, "Let me read a little bit of it because one case he talks about was that of a boy with an affected knee, of whom I have spoken. The knee was enlarged, and he had not been able to use a leg for 3 years. When he was brought to me, I felt there was nothing to be done, but to satisfy the parents, I treated it once or twice with iodine and prescribed bathing with hot water, which treatment I knew was not carried out. He was the only son, and I made a special appeal to Father Price to help me because I thought it would mean so much to the spirit of the poor mission. I was much surprised a month or 2 later to find the boy in much better health and able to use the leg a little. I brought him to school and directed him to exercise it as much as possible. Now I return to find that while the knee is still enlarged, the leg has grown nearly as long as the other, and he walks with only a very slight limp. If Father Price had a hand in this, I fear he will have his hands full in the future." So he attributes it, he thinks, because all he had was an iodine, to the intercession of Father Price there. So if those things like that would happen. Another thing, when Father Price was, this when he was still alive, he had, as I mentioned, an apostolate called the Regina Apostolorum Apostolate, training priest for doing missionary work for non-Catholics. However, Father Price lived very humbly, very poorly. He hadn't thought about all the ramifications that if you have a society, you have to take care of people and have proper things. Mm-hmm. And one of the deacons, he was, at that time, the only place they could study was at Belmont Abbey. The Benedictines had a theological school there. And he was having his doubts. He said, maybe I should not join this. About 2 or 3 days before his ordination to priesthood. At that night, he woke up. He saw the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He says it was a Sacred Heart of Jesus, and Jesus is holding on both sides of his arms 2 ragged children, because Father Price also had an orphanage. And he says, trust him, I am with you.
Wow.
So one of these little things that do happen, and there are many stories, but I can't remember them all because I would have to try to find them like that. But
yeah, Father Jim, do you think Rome will handle their cases separately, or will Bishop Walsh and Father Price be joined together?
Right now, because Father Price has gone ahead of time, already almost 2 years ahead of time, they're going to be done separately. They have to be right now. They have to be separately right now because of the time span. There's a separation.
What inspiration do you think our founders could offer the Catholic Church, especially the youth today?
Self-sacrifice, giving of oneself to others, to the poor, to the forgotten. But giving them with the idea and wanting to give them the best thing of all, Christ. Obviously, they took care of their physical needs. Father Price, when he went to China. He didn't know the language, but he went out and not only getting catechist, but also he was planning of having an orphanage. Also, because of in those days, the Chinese were doing it a different way now. They, if it was a girl baby and they were poor, they would throw it out, throw it out. And Father James Anthony, Bishop James Anthony, is the Field of Fire magazine in the early days documents those things. They would throw the baby away. Either dogs would eat it, or sometimes the babies would be picked up by someone and then sold as, you can say, servants or slaves to a rich family in another part of the world, part of China. So trying to help those, give them dignity, help them that way. But self-sacrifice and love for others, not love for oneself. And Father Price, obviously, and both of them, forgive one's neighbor. As I think I mentioned with when he was preaching, they're throwing cabbages at him. Now, he didn't get mad at them. He understood them. He understood North Carolinian people's character. But he said they were good people. He didn't get angry. He didn't try to use bad language or try to destroy something. Very, very respectful of the enemy, if you want to put it that way. Huh? Mm-hmm. He didn't make people his enemy. Both of them didn't make people their enemy. They loved people, and they wanted to love even those that were different from themselves. Certainly, I think that would be, you say, something go beyond yourself, but obviously for the one reason, love of Christ. So that, because the best thing anyone could give is this identification, obvious baptism. We're one with the Lord, and they wanted to give them that, and obviously help them in their humanity. I remember when I was in Korea, Father Joe, I was in a country parish, and lots of it was when they had, Korea was having, it was in 2000 almost, just about 2000, Korea was going through a crisis with money. The IMF is called, right? The IMF crisis. All right. Well, one day the office man comes to my office and said, "I want you to come out and see the grandmother." I said, "Why don't you come into my, come into my office, come in here? I think you can come in directly." She, no, come out. All right. So I went out, and there's one of the an older woman from the outstation. Her wallpaper was old newspaper. We had one little light there, very 15 watt or less light to live by. We used to visit them, and she used to be part of our helping them. We used to give rice. We say a big bag of rice. How much was it? 30 kilos was that? A kamani?
Right.
So we give them rice. But she had a bank book there, and was about, American money at that time was $10,000. Well, it was fine because Koreans have to save for a rainy day. Well, that would be expected. And I said, "We cannot accept that money." She said, "Father, you have to." I said, "Why?" She said, "Years ago, before I was a nobody." I said, "I don't have any education. I don't have much. I don't have any material things, a lot of material things." She said, "When I got baptized, God is my Father. I'm right. I have the greatest dignity in the world. I want you to accept it." Well, after that, I had to, and I did. And we used it to help that section of the parish eventually to get land to build a new parish. But can you imagine the fact that she felt, because when she was baptized, she had a new dignity, and she experienced it. She experienced it in a very profound way that God is speaking to them. The Father was speaking to them. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were speaking. But she had a great love for God the Father that way. So I would say, yes, it's very important for us to preach the gospel and to baptize for those who do not know Christ, because the Lord himself speaks to us. We have many experiences. Do you have any other questions? Because Father Jim is getting tired of talking.
This isn't a question, but I think this is going back to Father Price being romantic. The the Maryknoll magazine wrote an article about him, and I really like this line that they said. It says, Father Price communicated heart to heart with his love and prayers, even if not so much by words. And that reminds me a lot of St. Francis of Assisi saying, preach the gospel at all times, use words if necessary. So his love of God, his love of Christ has really shown a lot in his work. And I feel like as a person who is working with Maryknoll, I feel very honored and grateful to work with someone who has so much love for the work that they do.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when he went to China, he was only really there 8 months. They left September the 7th, and the first thing they do, they went down and they gave a greeting, very Oriental in many ways, so to Cardinal Gibbons, to thank Cardinal Gibbons for his love and protection. They all went, all four of them went, and then they went to the West Coast and took the September the 21st, the Feast of St. Matthew, the ship called the Ecuador, to different lands, and finally got to China. But when he got there, people would say he only could speak a few words. But they said, this is a holy man. They would call him the holy man. A man that loves us is what they would say in many ways. They said, the man that will loves us. And then when he was obvious other instances, but too, when he was in the hospital, even though his stomach was all gangrene because he had an ulcerated tooth. That was the first reason. And because of transportation, he got delayed almost 4 days or more, and then the boat didn't come. So everything was ulcerated, and when they opened him up, it was all pussy. They had no hope from then. But he would go, if he was able to say Mass, he would say Mass and then make the Stations of the Cross. But the sisters, everybody said, they could experience, by looking at him, that he was in the presence of God. And it was for us. And the other thing, the doctors were Protestant, I think, from what I recall. St. Paul's Hospital was still there. But the fact that they would take his heart out, and he must have had a great gift of persuasion. I mean, it's kind of a strange thing, Would you please take my heart out after I die? And that's not the thing you would probably agree to, but
right.
I mean, Protestants are not that romantic in that sense. Not that they're good people, but in that sense, they were not so romantic. So that sense, but he communicated that presence of God to people no matter where he went. And he didn't he said the rosary a lot. He usually hid his rosary under his cloaks. But if you went up close, you could see that he was saying his rosary, things like that. But he had the presence of God. He lived in the presence of God. But he didn't want people to think that he was anything special. In fact, he asked people here at Maryknoll, they wanted him to call him Father Bernadette because he wanted to lose his own identity. He went that far. It was kind of strange in many ways. We think about it. Call me, say, Joe, Father Joe, and I'm Father Jim, Call me something different. It kind of shakes you up. You're different. Yeah. One of the brothers came back. He didn't know my name. He was calling me Charlie. Hey, Charlie. And I had to tell him, no, I'm not Charlie. I'm somebody else. But it shakes you up when somebody calls you by a different name. But he wanted to be called by a different name because he wanted to lose himself so completely.
Right. Yeah.
Any other little questions that you might have? Big questions, little questions?
I want to thank you, Father James. This is very informative, and I hope inspiring for our listeners. And God bless you in your work and with the cause for the canonization of our founders.
Well, thank you, Father Joe and Luna, for listening to me, because as I ramble, it goes like a rambling kind of a thing. I ramble a lot, and I'm trying to look at my eyes are getting older, so I have to kind of look and see where I am. Okay. All right, is that it then? Are we finished?
I just want to say thank you. Also for sharing your knowledge. You've been doing a lot of research on this, I can tell. And I just really, really am grateful to you for sharing their stories and sharing, the work that we do and why we do what we do.
I was going to bring a prayer card, and we got a new prayer card approved by Cardinal Dolan for both of the founders. And then Father Kevin Hanlon, who is our regional superior here, he wanted a separate prayer card, and I got that done today, but it's is not printed. Eventually, when I get it done, I'll share the copies of those. So things like that.
Great.
Prepare for the founders. Because it says their zeal, their love for others, their unselfish, their self-sacrificial love. That was an important thing, because you see on the news lately, people don't know how to forgive.
Right.
Yes, there's evil in the world. They knew it. There's a lot of evil in the world. It hasn't stopped. But how do we deal with the evil? The only way we can overcome it, what Jesus said on the cross: Father, forgive them; they know not what they do. And I think both of the founders, in their life, if you look at it, that's what they're saying. Father, forgive them; they know not what they do. But we want you to experience the heart of Jesus. So, and there's that in other sense too. His heart, the whole thing about having the heart, the Sacred Heart of Jesus. His heart is a symbol of that love he had for other people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Maryknoll Podcast Among the People. To learn more about the work of Maryknoll around the world, visit our website, maryknollsociety.org. Or if you'd like to subscribe to our English or Spanish magazines, visit maryknollmagazine.org. We'd really like to hear what you have to say about this episode, so please leave your reviews, comments, or questions below. And feel free to share this podcast with friends or anyone you feel may be interested. This has been Maryknoll Father Joe Veneroso, along with co-host Megan Fleming, for Among the People. Till next time.